Today we're going to talk about nonfiction and biography. Just to note, nonfiction is a large category in which biography fits, but biography doesn't always have to be part of nonfiction. We'll speak about this more a little bit later. So first I want to note the reading benchmarks that are associated with what we're going to be going over. It goes down as low as kindergarten all the way up to 5th grade in terms of recognizing texts, recognizing the author and the illustrator and how illustrators work to convey meaning in the text. Asking and answering key details in the text, demonstrating and understanding the text's central message or lesson, explaining major differences between books that tell stories and books that give text. That's actually something that's almost in almost every grade, is a really emphasis on the narrator or speaker and knowing who is conveying this information. And in grade 3, it's actually distinguishing their own point of view from that of the narrator or those of the characters. Knowing what's the opinion, what's fact, what's your opinion, what's your fact, your truth, is important. And it's important to critical literacy as well. And explaining how specific aspects of the text illustrate text. And we have a lot in 5th grade. 4th grade, refer to details and examples in the text when explaining what text says explicitly and when drawing inferences, explaining the major differences between genre, especially of informational text, determine the meaning of words and phrases that they are used in the text, and of course, specifically in concept books and in nonfiction books that might be science specific or discipline specific, there will be a lot of vocabulary that's going to be new and discipline specific. So it's important to be able to unpack what those words mean by using the context given to you in the book. So and there's also an emphasis on describing how a narrator or speaker's point of view influence how events are described or how things are described. Analyze how visual multimedia elements contribute to the meaning and tone of the text. Compare and contrast stories in the same genre to various other topics. And one of the most important things, self-select text for personal enjoyment, interest, and academic tasks. In 5th grade, is very much when you're going to start writing reports. I think mine was about an elephant, the first one I wrote. But teaching children how to use nonfiction texts in an academic way is the beginning of starting their academic career, you could say. It's learning how to quote, learning how to refer to sources to back up and support their comments. It starts here. And part of being able to teach that is knowing the field of nonfiction, which is defining nonfiction. Books of information and fact about any concept. Emphasis is on facts and concepts. Truthful, verifiable, understandable. Wide range of appeal to young readers. You can judge it more objectively than fiction because it is factual. So something to also remember, a lot of the time there will be the use of imaginative narratives in nonfiction. If you remember, there's the Magic School Bus series. No, a bus cannot shrink into an ant and crawl into someone's body to explore it, or dive into space to search the planets. But the major purpose of that book is to convey factual information. It's not the imaginative narrative that is privileged. Hawking also wrote a book about a boy exploring the universe. Hawking, very famous physicist. I think he wrote it with his wife. The main purpose of that book is to explain science, not to convey the imaginative narrative. The imaginative narrative is the vehicle to explain the science. So here we have the Magic School Bus, and my mother, who was a science teacher, actually used to use this all the time. So, their Magic School Bus exploring the ocean. They go in the ocean. The Magic School Bus exploring the human body. You see, a little school bus in an artery, and in space. Obviously all of these things cannot happen, but the purpose of the book is to convey concepts and to teach. And that's why it's considered nonfiction. And it's a series book. Nonfiction can also come in poetic form, as we went over in poetry. So it can be about Swirl by Swirl is actually, it's a lot of illustrations with very few text, but it goes through the environment and shows how the swirl is scientifically can be seen in the environment, in nature, naturally. And here it's explaining how the swirl is part of the splash. And then there's the dinosaur book and comets and maps. And it's in poetic form. They're using poetry, but it's a vehicle to convey informational knowledge. So now we're going to consider quality in nonfiction. And this is important. Considering quality in nonfiction, there must be good, transparent balance between fact and theory. You should be able to tell what is fact and what is theory by the language used in the book. For instance, scientists think that dinosaurs became extinct because a large asteroid hit the Earth, versus dinosaurs became extinct because a large asteroid hit the Earth. In the second sentence, no one is being attributed to that knowledge when it's as if it should just be assumed. So there's no breakup between theory and fact. None of us were alive during the dinosaurs. So although we have lots of evidence, it's still theoretically based on this evidence. So we need to attribute that fact to scientists. And it's important to make that distinction, and it's part of the core standards that the students understand that distinction, that they shouldn't just it's not just based on assumption. This fact, it has to be attributed. Documentation of expertise research. A lot of the time, research methods should be stated. That could be in the form of an author's note, a bibliography, or a biography of the author. They have to somehow be an authority of the subject. Like, as I said before, Hawking's, world-renowned physicist, wrote a book about exploring the universe. His mere name connotes an authority on the subject. But we're not always going to know the author. So if the author has a PhD in biology and they're teaching, and it's a book about biology, that's an expertise, especially if in the back they're using a bunch of academic references. If there is nothing of the sort, you may have to question how much you take what for granted. Something else you should be aware of is, just like any book, nonfiction books age. So what was factual a couple of years ago might not be factual now. For instance, there was a book, forget the name, that described how a certain species was extinct. Then 2 years later, they found the species. So that book is inaccurate. So specifically with science, you also have to make sure that it's current. Considering quality in nonfiction style. Expository prose does not have to be dry or boring. Interesting, vivid writing, revealing enthusiasm as well as knowledge, rich language with appropriate terminology. Of course, it can have a narrative element, as I noted earlier on, and it should be written to engage readers as well as teach them. Considering quality in nonfiction style. Definition of terms. So definition is in context. The definition becomes part of the writing. And this is what I was speaking about earlier on, is that there needs to be a definition of the specific disciplinary terms that the book is using within the context of the book. So if we take a look at this, we live in the atmosphere, the enormous ocean of air that surrounds Earth. Weather is what is happening at the bottom of the atmosphere, mostly in a layer 7.5 miles thick called the troposphere. Tropos comes from a Greek word meaning change. So we live in the atmosphere, and then atmosphere is qualified by the enormous ocean of air that surrounds Earth. So it's given a definition, and we need that definition in order to understand the next sentence. Weather is what is happening at the bottom of the atmosphere, which was just described in the previous sentence. So, and then we even get the etymology of troposphere, which, interestingly enough, I think one of the core standards in 3rd grade was to start understanding the Greek and Latin etymology of certain words, which was a little advanced, I think, for 3rd grade, but hey, it's here. So everything is here for them to be able to unpack it themselves and not need a dictionary right next to them. And that's important for the accessibility aspect. So something else that's important is design. Attractive, reader-friendly format. Appropriate, well-placed illustrations that illuminate facts and concepts. The book should include ancillaries that help the reader use the book, indexes, glossaries, lists of sources. So it has to be something that you want to pick up. There are a lot of great books out there, nonfiction books with outstanding illustrations that just mesmerize you. And it should be accessible. Index, glossary, those sorts of things should be there. If a student's writing a report, or if they just want quick access to look up something, it's there, it's easy, it's accessible, it's reliable, it's factual, and all in all, it's a good quality book. So organization is also something to consider. It's clear, recognizable organization appropriate for intended audience, illuminates concepts and builds understanding. Ideas follow logical pattern tied to central idea or theme. Appropriate aids such as table of contents, index, bibliography, and glossary. So again, organization, it's clear. It's not helpful if it's confusing. Even if it's artistically superior, it's not going to be helpful if you can't make sense. If you, as an adult, can't make sense of it, certainly a child would most likely struggle with it as well. Why nonfiction? Nonfiction offers information about the real world, feeding and fueling curiosity. Curiosity increases knowledge and schemas for understanding new ideas and information. Nonfiction trade books offer breadth of information, depth of information, variation in topic, variation in reading level, opportunities to learn to read, opportunities to learn to read critically. And a lot of the benchmarks in the core curriculum for literature have to do with reading text and doing a compare and contrast. And in nonfiction, and particularly even biography, reading text on the same subject, but 2 or 3 different texts, which we all do when we write papers when we're older, and comparing and contrasting them and comparing and contrasting their quality is something that nonfiction is perfect for. And to know the different qualities of it, you need to be able to teach it in that manner. And that not all nonfiction, just because it says nonfiction, is the same. That there are different levels of expertise and being reliable and credible. So one place to always with the awards to look at is the Orbis Pictus Award. It's something that's given to superior nonfiction, juvenile, and in 2011 it was ballet for Martha Graham. In 2010, The Secret World of Walter Anderson, both biographies pretty much. But it's the Orbis Pictus Award sets down the criteria, which I pretty much just went. So now we're going to be looking at different kinds of biography. Now, as I said, nonfiction if we're looking at genre is a spectrum in terms of fiction and nonfiction. It's not polarized. There's not. It's not just this is nonfiction and this is fiction. There are some books like historical fiction, fictionalized biography that sway on the spectrum between fiction and nonfiction. And I'll explain that more when we go over what fictionalized biography is. But in a way, it's kind of like historical fiction. They have some factual information and they build a narrative on it, but it's not completely factual. So it's kind of swaying on the spectrum more in between nonfiction and fiction. So the difference between biography and autobiography. Well, auto, meaning I, or is I write about myself. So autobiography. Then there's biography, somebody else writing about you. So it's a branch of nonfiction. It tells a story of the life or part of the life of a real person. They give factual information about the lives of actual people, including their experiences, influences, accomplishments, and legacies. Although it is considered nonfiction, biography and autobiography can either be mostly fictional or authentic or nonfiction. Span the divide between fiction and nonfiction. Biographical subjects. So biographical subjects can range the gamut. Famous people have made a difference, political and military leaders, scientists and inventors, adventurers and explorers, practitioners of the arts, sports, heroes, extraordinary, ordinary people. And extraordinary, ordinary people are, as we see down in the corner, one boy from Kosovo, an extraordinary person who survived ethnic warfare, is an extraordinary person. So, and there's, sports heroes, a lot of biographies for young people on presidents. So, authentic biography, grounded in fact. Even dialogue comes from some historical record, some sort of archival material. In authentic biography, all factual information is documented through eyewitness accounts, written documents, letters, diaries, and more recently, audio and visual materials. It may include a list of resources, source notes, bibliography, glossary. Archival materials can be diaries, letters, journal entries, photographs, collected papers. If it's truly authentic, it usually includes a list of sources and addresses the author's process. There's usually some sort of author's note. A good example is this biography on Lincoln, which has, is completely based on archival material. And it's usually written by historians because they have to go into archives and looking at old documents from meetings. And, back then there wasn't audio and video. So, looking at diaries and letters. And often throughout the book, there'll be pictures of the various archival materials it's based on. Now, this is nonfiction biography, authentic. It's completely from the real world. There's also authentic biography, Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. Really great book. It unveils the truth behind the Rosa Parks story, which was it was actually Claudette Colvin who was the first person to sit on refused to move from the white part of the bus during the civil rights movement, but she could not be the figurehead that Rosa Parks could be. And this explains that story, which you would think would be very complicated, but it is very accessible for, I would say, 5th graders, 4th graders even. Excerpts from the interviews with Claudette is used in it, exhibited archival materials, tons of photos, comprehensive glossary, a bibliography for each chapter of the text, references to other source materials, articles, and everything. It said the Lincoln, a photobiography. Freedom is careful to distinguish fact from opinion and truth from legend. And especially if you're working with presidents from before there were audio and video. That's important. The text includes direct quotations from Lincoln, gives a panoramic view of society and politics at the time. So it situates Lincoln within the larger social sphere. It's not just Lincoln, but the role Lincoln played in the context of that world he lived in. And it exemplifies what an authentic biography should be. What fictionalized biography. Fictionalized biography is also based on careful research, but the author creates dramatic episodes from known facts using imagined conversation. The conversation, of course, carefully structured around pertinent facts that are known, but the actual words are invented by the author. Some biographers are so ungrounded in facts that they are more fiction. You can tell this by fewer and no sources. No distinction is made between what is fact and what is made up. Includes thoughts and conversations that we could not know. It would be a mistake to think of it as a factual resource. So if it's a biography and you're entering the brain of, I don't know, let's say George Washington, and it's omniscient, that is impossible. We cannot possibly know what George Washington was thinking unless there was somebody there and he was asking him to transcribe his thoughts. Also, if it's about George Washington chopping down a cherry tree, which is a legend, and there's no reference to how the person knows, and they're just assuming that's what you know, that is a fictionalized biography. But George Washington did exist, and George Washington was a president. So there is a factual framework that the author works with, and then they build in the drama. And it's very much like historical fiction, but it's important to note, in historical fiction, the attention is on the setting. In biography, attention is on the person. And that's the biggest difference between historical fiction and fictionalized biography. And fictionalized biography often can teeter more on the nonfiction side, because some writers do go to a great extent to try to find archival materials to back up their assertions. So here we have some examples of biographical fiction. Some very engaging biographies. Pocahontas by Joseph Burrick, told in alternating chapters by Pocahontas and John Smith. Obviously, this is partially made up because Pocahontas didn't speak English at that time, and I doubt was in conversation with John Smith, but it's giving you diverse perspectives, and it's based on what it was known at the time of Pocahontas and John Smith's relationship. Then there's Ben and Me, An Astonishing Life of Benjamin Franklin by his good mouse Amos, discovered and edited and illustrated by Robert Lawson. And it's about Benjamin Franklin through the eyes of a mouse. So it's this is considered a postmodern book, actually, but it's based on a lot of the factual information we know about Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin kept extensive diaries and was a prolific writer. So we know a lot about Ben Franklin and his inventions, but there's a spin on it because it's through the eyes of a mouse. So autobiography and memoir. So memoir, memory is part of memoir, and a way to distinguish the two is that a memory is something that is subjective. So when you're recalling something from the past, and let's say you have siblings, you might recall it completely different than your siblings recall it. And that's why in memoir, there's far more latitude with what is factual. Augustus Burroughs actually writes a lot of memoirs. So does David Sedaris, and it's fantastical in a way. It's realistic, but it has fantasy in it. But it's called memoir because that's how they remembered the events as children. They're not trying to convey factual information. They're trying to convey not just the event, but how they viewed it through the eyes of a child. So, although it's related to autobiography and that it deals with an event or events in the author's life, it must have an element of retrospection or reflection on events, meaning to the author. The point of memoirs is the author's revelations of what events in their lives meant to them, not the events themselves. The similarity between first-person narratives and memoirs, and note that without the author's note, a reader may not be able to tell what really happened to the author. So, whether it's an autobiography or a memoir, you're really relying on the author to tell you how based in fact it is. Because autobiography is when they're saying, this is all factual information. It's not based on my memoirs. It's based on a diary I kept, or it's based on me interviewing people in my life to make sure I'm not warping the story. A memoir makes no such pretension. It's saying this is the memory. Not everything is going to be factual. I'm not actually going to know the names of the friends I had when in 5th grade. When in autobiography, they have a duty to research the names of the friends they had when they were little. So memoir is based on the events of the life of the author. The events are interpretive, though. Memoir is even less grounded in fact, based on memory and perception, interpretive accounts in which events are selected and arranged in order to bring out a particular theme or personality trait. Memoir is a collection of emblematic moments that help the subject become who they were or are. More like snapshots and vignettes, unified in some way, that bring out some truth about the writer's life. And a lot of people, it's when people get older, sometimes you hear them like, well, now I'll write my memoir. And it's very different than an autobiography due to the claim of truth or the claim of fact. There are no claims of fact. There's a claim of truth, meaning that's the way they remember it. That's their truth, their subjective truth. But objective fact is not part of memoir. Objective fact is autobiography and biography. But the truth of the author, what the author believes happened, or their subjective response to their childhood or the event that they're explaining, is their personal truth. So it's a fuzzy realm between fiction and nonfiction. What is the difference between fact and truth? Which of the below sentences best describes memoir? Blank doesn't have to be documented. Blank may not be documented. Well, number one, you should choose memoir. Doesn't have to be documented. You're relying on the author for their truth. Autobiography may not be documented, but because you're relying on the author for truth and fact, but it's good that it be documented. Because this is what happens when you don't document things. A Million Little Pieces by James Frey, if people remember, was part of the Oprah Book Club. And it's a memoir, but unfortunately, he was brought on Oprah, and he explained the memoir, the story in the memoir, and where he went to jail, his girlfriend died, he was a horrific drug addict, and then he, redeemed himself. Well, a couple months later, some people started to find out that this story had no basis in reality whatsoever. The girlfriend he claimed died was alive. He spent 1 day in jail, not 7 months. And it was more than exaggerated. It was fictionalized, and it couldn't be a truth. It can't be a truth that you remember someone's dead when they're not, especially when you were an adult and they're walking around. So Oprah actually invited him back on the show and kind of yelled at him, and because it caused a lot of controversial interviews because she had vouched for him. She had vouched for his truth. And the truth ended up not being real at all in any way, shape, or form. And he acknowledged it eventually, that it wasn't a memoir, that it was fiction. So it can be very considering quality, accuracy in social details, verisimilitude with setting and surroundings, reliance on primary sources for authentic biography, truthfulness for biographical fiction and memoir, setting a rich and vivid depiction of social details, cultural forces that shaped a life, plots reflect key elements in the subject's life, plot based on seamlessly integrated facts. You don't want a book that preaches or teaches too explicitly. It should be written in such a way that's engaging so the facts are integrated. It's a story, which is why biographical fiction, is so popular. Memoirs are so popular because the story is more important than the factual information, rather than something that's completely nonfiction or biography or autobiography, where the facts are more important than the actual narrative. So, in all of those, however, the person cannot be divorced from the social context. So while the person's life is primary, the social context must be there, and the way it shaped that person or influenced that person should be part of the description of the individual. So, portrayal of the subject, multidimensional, individual, fully human, no stereotype. Style reflects language and customs of the time and place, while still understandable. Theme unifies facts into a coherent idea with universal application and appeal. Illustrations illuminate the character of the subject and help construct authentic setting. So, illustrations are really there to support the text, or to extend the text in terms of detailing aspects of that person's life or what that person looked like. The portrayal of the subject, the biographical fiction in part exists because we don't have extensive material on people like Pocahontas. So authors make her multidimensional by filling in the things we don't know. The style, dialect could be used in certain aspects, but it can't be used to such an extent where it doesn't make sense or it's mocking. It should be used in a very respectful way and in a way that is accessible. And theme. There are always themes, even in nonfiction or biographical books. There are several biographies on Hillary Clinton for young people, and the biggest theme is usually, alluding to the fact that she's going to be the first female president, which we don't know yet. But the fact that women can do anything, that's one of the or we're making great strides. So that's one of the themes, and it's coherent, and it makes sense with what she stands for. Episodic or complete, consider audience, consider accuracy or simplification, consider choice of episodes to present. Single subject biographies, collective biographies, about many subjects, usually thematic. So episodic, a lot of the time when on poets, there will be a picture book on a poet, and they'll use the poet's own poetry to describe that person's life, and then they'll have pictures of the poet. Or with Martin Luther King, they'll have just the episode of Martin Luther King giving the I Have a Dream speech, and him giving that speech in front of a bunch of people, but the only text is I have a dream, and everything else is dependent on the pictures. So that's episodic. It's just showing an aspect of that person's life. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how accessible is it? Is it easy to interpret? Is it fair to characterize that person with this particular poem or this particular speech? Is it emblematic of that human being? And I would say for Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream speech is something that we think of automatically when we think of Martin Luther King. Single subject biographies, it's about one person. Collective biographies, sometimes there'll be biographies, on women or people with disabilities that are famous, or various presidents. So it could be on a variety of subjects and a variety of themes. So episodic biography and autobiography highlights a particular part of someone's life, allows an author to present a lot of details and events in a manageable number of pages, provides young readers with details without sacrificing authenticity. So Langston rides the train. Langston's Train Ride is about Langston Hughes. And it captured the moment Langston Hughes came to believe in himself as a writer. And it's complete. All of the text is completely his poem. So it's a pivotal poem, and it shows a turning point in his life, which means it's authentic and it's true to the spirit of who Langston Hughes was. Complete biographies. Spans the entire life of the person, authentic, everything is documented. And a good example of that is The Great and Only Barnum. And it won an LA Best Books for Young Adults 2010 by Candace Fleming. And it spans the entire life of Barnum from when he was a little kid to when he died, and the social context of Barnum. It has tons of pictures. Another one is the Adolf Hitler. The quality of a biography may change over time. This is a complete biography, meaning you start when Hitler's little all the way to when he kills himself in the bunker after World War II. And it won an award, but there's a lot of information that has come up since it was written in 2002 about Hitler and about the influences that he had to the National Socialist movement, and the various things about the final solution that are kind of skipped over in the book. And so it diminishes the authenticity of the book, which is, again, you have to look at when these things are published. Especially if it's about a controversial figure like Hitler, people are constantly doing research on famous people like that, and new information is constantly popping up. Simple or brief biographies. It's not episodic. It spans the entire life of the person. Is everything included that needs to be there? Be careful. Sometimes simple can present a less than authentic picture of someone. So, for example, there's Wilma Unlimited, How Wilma Rudolph Became the World's Fastest Woman. And it's about her, and much is communicated through pictures rather than text. Is it authentic or true to Wilma's experience? It's simplified. It's not getting into the details. So arguably, it's a way to introduce a young person to a particular individual, but I wouldn't say it's an authoritative source. Again, there are tons of not autobiographies, but biographies on Einstein. There's fictionalized biographies, there's, resource biographies, authentic biographies, a broad overview of his life, great photos and quotes, focus on the major conflicts and achievements that mark Einstein's life, highlights Einstein's intellectual contributions and benefited from society. So there's photo essays. Nonfiction photo essays are actually getting more and more popular, and that's more what Einstein's book is, and much of the nonfiction information is conveyed through archival material. So then we have collective biography and autobiography. I've never seen a collective memoir, but it could exist. We were there too, young people in America and history. So young people telling their own stories. So in the civil rights movement, so it's collective autobiography. Children of War, Voices of Iraqi Refugees, also collective autobiography, because they're collecting the stories of these individuals. Extraordinary People with Disabilities, which is a collective biography, because it's about, they're not writing it, it's somebody who assembled this information. Why biography, memoir, and/or autobiography? Makes history come alive, displays individuals' role in shaping history, demonstrates the human behind the greatness, asks readers to consider their own potential,